live in a world with so many questions, so much uncertainty, but there is one thing I need to know. What is a podcast? Several weeks ago, I was filming the Yay or Nay episodes with my cousin Connor, where we propose an idea of whether or not we agree with something yay.
I would consider myself convinced. I'll switch to yay.
All right?
I'll switch to yay.
Or disagree with something nay. I will say nay.
Mm-hmm.
And while we were filming those episodes, an idea that came up that we ended up not filming was whether or not the AJ Kallas show, my podcast, is in fact a podcast. I mean, it's not on any podcast streaming services. It's just on YouTube. It's not prone to any one specific format. There have been interviews over Zoom. There have been interviews in person. There have been book reviews. There have been casual conversations. Nothing specific centered around any one theme or format. And there's no audio only. It's just video. It's just on YouTube. So is that a podcast? Well, when discussing this idea with my cousin, instead of defending myself appropriately by saying something like, well, I'm just figuring this out, it's still very early on, I'm not quite sure how I'd want to format this or what I'd even want to talk about, instead, I misappropriated a quote from a famous historic person and quoted Kierkegaard saying, "To label me is to negate me." It's something that I say very often to get out of situations like that, but it's such a disservice to Kierkegaard because he was not opposed to labels. And I don't think that we should either. And so today, in this episode of whatever I want to call this, we're going to figure out what is a podcast. And before we do that, let's go over the history of podcasting. So when it comes to the history of podcasting, I think that there are three specific moments in history that are the most important. And it begins in 2004 with Adam Curry and Dave Winner. Dave Winner? I think that's his name. It's spelt Winner, but might be Weiner. Dave Weiner? No, it can't be.
Podcast. I'm your host, Brian McConnell. Dave Weiner.
See? It's Dave Weiner. That doesn't make any sense. It shouldn't be spelled that way. It should be spelled Dave Winner. Because he's a winner. He invented podcasting. And later, that same year, journalist Ben Hammersley coined the term podcasting in his Guardian article, Audible Revolution. The second most important moment in podcasting history is in 2005, when podcasts were introduced to the world through Steve Jobs and Apple. And over the course of the next several years, presidents like George W. Bush, comedians like Ricky Gervais and Adam Carolla were prominent in pushing podcasts into the forefront of the cultural zeitgeist. And in 2013, Apple announced that there were over 1 billion subscriptions to podcasts. Not 1 billion individual users, but amongst all of the podcasts collectively, there were over 1 billion subscriptions, which is not a small amount of numbers. Well, it's not a small number, but it's also not a small amount of numbers. Well, it's one number. It is a small amount of a big number. It's a small amount of numbers that is a big number. The third moment that I think is the most important for podcast history is the introduction and debut of the podcast Serial, which was an investigative journalism podcast narrating nonfiction stories over several episodes. It quickly was able to gather in non-podcast listeners and was able to kind of expand the cultural zeitgeist to be more aware of podcasts. Now there are, over 121 million podcasts. Let me double check. I don't know where I got that number from at all. It says here the Statistica research. This is why I don't go off of my notes. This is why I should go off of my notes. I shouldn't get off of my notes. I gotta stay on the notes. The Statistica Research Department conducted a study in 2018 that predicts by 2022 there could be over 132 million podcast listeners. Okay, not 121 million. I don't know where I got that. While that might be a good idea of the history of podcasting is still very young. It's only 16-ish years old. It can now just begin to drive in the United States, but it'll be really interesting to see where it drives off to. Because podcasts vary in length. Some are really short and some are really long. And they definitely vary in format. Some are audio only. Some are video and audio. I hope not just video. Some are interviews. Some are reviews. They can be anything. They vary in format and they definitely vary in frequency, in how often they come out. Some are every day. Some are every week and every month. It really depends on the specific podcast. But what makes something a podcast and something not a podcast? I think there are two things. And so today, I'm going to give you AJ's secret podcast criteria that makes us know whether or not something is a podcast or not a podcast rules. So these are the rules. Podcast comes from two English words: iPod and broadcast. The first rule of podcast is it has to be downloadable. I have to be able to put it on an iPod or an iPod Touch or some sort of MP3, MP4 player. I need to be able to download it. Automatically, this eliminates the AJ Kallas Show. It's not downloadable. It's on YouTube and YouTube only. And unless you have a YouTube Red Premium TV subscription, then maybe you can download it. I don't really know how that works. I still have ads on YouTube. So while I was editing this video, YouTube sent me an email saying, AJ, we would like you to apply to become a trusted YouTube podcast tester. And I thought to myself, no way. While I'm making a video about podcasts, YouTube is going to start their own podcast service and they want me to be a part of that? Wow, that's really cool. I only have like 150 subs, so they're really looking out for the little guy who's interested in podcasts. That's really cool. So I skimmed over the rest of the email, barely read it, hit the apply button, sent in my application, and about 10 minutes later they said, that's it. Thank you. And I said, no, thank you, YouTube. But out loud to myself, not actually to anyone. And then I reread the email, or more like read it for the first time to see, okay, what is this actually, what is this going to entail? Is this going to change the rules for what becomes a podcast and not a podcast? Because that might affect the video, whatever. And it turns out I just completely misread the email. They're not starting their own podcast service. They don't want me to become a podcast tester. Instead, they wanted me to apply to become a YouTube product tester. So I misread the email because I was excited about this video. And don't feel bad, because that is just a fun little adventure that we all got to go on. So there's not much else to that story, except I thought that it would be fun. It doesn't change any of the rules. And so before we get back into rule number 2, you can hit that subscribe button, because that will probably increase my ability to read. So let's get back to rule number 2 of what makes something a podcast. The second rule of Podcast Club is it has to have more than one episode. If it's just one episode, then it might as well be just a TED Talk or an interview or something. It's not a podcast. So long as it is downloadable and has more than one episode, that is a podcast. So this episode would not be finished, it wouldn't be complete, it wouldn't be over unless I gave my recommendations of podcasts that I listen to intermittently throughout my days to you. Because I care about you. I'm thinking about you a lot, and I want you to be able to enjoy the same podcasts that I enjoy. Or at least listen to. I don't know if I enjoy all of these, but I definitely listen to them. And because I've made this segue into maybe not enjoying them, let's start with the politics category. Said that weird. politics. So I'm pretty center-right leaning economically, and on that political compass, and then pretty like center libertarian on the authority libertarian side of stuff. So we got the axes, and then I'm here, I think. I'm looking at the camera. I'm over here. That's where I am, ish. In that area. Well, that might be where I am politically on that compass, even though I don't think the compass is a phenomenal way of understanding someone's politics, because I think that there's more on this axis than just economics. I think that there's also, whether or not someone is more traditional or more progressive culturally. But regardless, that's the compass that we have, so whatever. But where I listen to podcasts, I like to, especially about things that I'm unfamiliar with, I will listen to the guys over at the Daily Wire. That's Ben Shapiro's company. And I will also listen to David Pakman and Kyle Kalinske, who are progressives. And I think getting kind of a more, like a newer, like not, neocon, but still more conservative side of politics and some progressives. I feel like I have a good idea of, where at least my generation of people are. And so that's that. I won't listen to them every day, especially like the, Kyle Kalinske and David Pakman. While I do appreciate their perspective, it's more difficult for me to listen to them, but I do listen to them. So I'm going to recommend them, not because I endorse them, not because whatever, but whenever I want to be informed about something, I do find it helpful to get both, like a Michael Knowles and a Kyle Kalinski's perspective. Other people that I will listen to on the politics side, and actually this is the number one person I can recommend when it comes to politics. Sean Fitzgerald has a YouTube channel called Actual Justice Warrior. I think he's very funny, and I don't think he's ever been wrong. I don't know what I would call him. He's not a journalist necessarily. He's a political commentator. I don't know. He just will sit in front of his camera behind his desk and just talk about the news. And I gain so much insight from him. And so for me, it's like he is the most valuable resource I have politically, which probably says a lot about a lot. For me personally, I love philosophy, theology, and so I listen to a lot of philosophy and theology podcasts. And the people that I would recommend the most, I've got a list of 5 people that I really enjoy. You can find a lot of their content up on YouTube. For sure, that's mostly where I will be listening to them. I do know that a lot of these guys do have stuff on other streaming services, but you can just find them on YouTube. I'll have a link to all of these people's stuff in the description. And the first person is Cameron Batusi's channel, Capturing Christianity. Cameron is a Christian who exposes people to the intellectual side of Christianity. I love him. I support him on Patreon. That's how much I like his content. Some of it's more dense, which is what I really enjoy. He hosts a lot of debates amongst Christians and non-Christians alike, discussing a lot of different theological and philosophical topics, whether it comes to the existence of God, the problem of evil and suffering. And so I really, really enjoy him. I appreciate him a ton and love being able to support him on Patreon. So definitely check him out. That's Capturing Christianity. And the second bloke that I'm going to recommend is Matt Fradd. He is a Catholic YouTuber and speaker and writer, and I really appreciate him. He's a funny guy, and he and Cameron Batusi from Capturing Christianity do a lot of stuff together, especially recently, and so I really appreciate his perspective. I am not a Catholic, but I really get a lot out of hearing his podcast, Pints with Aquinas, where he will discuss with someone a topic from the Summa Theologia, typically, which is St. Thomas Aquinas' like magnum opus. And so I really appreciate Matt Fradd. I think that he does a phenomenal job over at Pints with Aquinas. The third person is not even a Christian, Protestant, nor Catholic, and that is Cosmic Skeptic, I really like his stuff on YouTube. I obviously disagree, but I do appreciate him and love hearing his perspective as he has continued to grow and challenge his mind and change his mind on a lot of things. It's been very intellectually satisfying for me, especially when it comes to different arguments for meat consumption and a lot of other things that I wouldn't normally get with some of the theology guys. They're more concerned, about, different doctrinal positions, but I get more of, I don't want to say secular, because I don't think that meat consumption is an inherently secular thing. But I do appreciate Cosmic Skeptic. Definitely check him out. But no, hey, he's an atheist. You might like that. You might be an atheist. But they definitely interact, those guys, or at least Cameron Batusi and Cosmic Skeptic. They definitely have been in debates. Cosmic Skeptic has been on Cameron Bertuzzi's channel to debate other people. And so they're all kind of connected a little bit. The fourth person is Trent Horn. His podcast is Council of Trent. He is also a Catholic, and he is originally from Catholic Answers, I believe. And I really appreciate his podcast and a lot of the work that he does, both on his own personal stuff and also the debates that he's been in. I just find that kind of stuff really fulfilling. And then I don't want to say more lighthearted, but the fifth person that I recommend in terms of podcasts is Pastor Mike Winger, who is the Bible thinker on YouTube. He does a lot of different sermons. He'll do debates. He'll do very long studies over specific topics of the Bible. He does a lot of live streams. Really recommend Pastor Mike Winger. Think he's a great guy. I'm not sure what church he's affiliated with, but he's a solid guy. Now that I'm thinking about it, not all of these are downloadable. And I think that speaks to a lot. I know I had my big AJ's podcast description rules for figuring out whether or not something is a podcast or not a podcast. What I can say is that podcasts, we're still figuring it out. I don't know what podcasts will look like in the future. And instead of saying something pretentious like when we try and label podcasts, we negate what they can be. I want to live in a world where we know, but I think that I am going to have the humility to say, I might not be the person to figure that out, because I don't even know what my podcast is going to look like. But I do have a couple ideas, and over the next several weeks, I am going to be releasing weekly book reviews of books that I have liked and recommended. Some of them shouldn't be any surprise to this channel. I have definitely recommended books in the past, and I'm going to be doing some full in-depth reviews and critiques and things that I gained from it, and I really hope that you get a lot out of that, and I hope that will become a real podcast, okay? Something downloadable. But that's only if people want it to be downloadable, because I don't really know how important that is. I think being able to stream something might just be as fine as being able to download it in today's day and age, where LTE and 5G, 4 or 5G, 6Gs. I got 6Gs. I don't know why I said that. But what I will say is podcasts are super fun, I guess. This is not going downhill. We're only going on the uppity up. This is all just an upward trajectory. We're only going up from here, all right? This is an upward spiral trajectory. We're not getting any worse. Definitely subscribe, because I'm going to be releasing some book reviews. The first book to come out will be The Power of Habit by Charles Duhigg. I've talked about that book a ton, but I've got a bunch of other books coming out. How to Win Friends and Influence People by Dale Carnegie, and a bunch of other books that I'm reading right now, because I looked at my Goodreads and I'm like, I've read like 80 books so far, and it's August. I should probably tell some people about them, because obviously it's something that I like. But and I hope you like them too. In the meantime, I hope you're doing well. You know, I love you. I wish peace upon you, and God bless. I will catch you guys in the next one, regardless of whether or not it's downloadable or not. There will be more than one episode. So I will catch you guys later.